The SIG-Sauer Romeo 4T and Romeo 8T are SIG's high-end tactical red dots. They're assembled in the US and targeted at professional end users. I know most of you just did a double take at the word assembled, so let's start with that. SIG's higher-end optics like the Romeo 4T and 8T and the Juliet 4 and Juliet 6 magnifiers are marked as assembled in Oregon rather than made in the USA. That's because Oregon has some pretty specific laws about what made in the US actually means. The United States doesn't produce a lot of electronics or glass, so it's pretty difficult to get a 100% American-made red dot. That's why the loopholed LCO, for example, is designed, machined, and assembled in Oregon. The Romeo 4T is a typical micro red dot with the same form factor and mounting footprint as an Aimpoint T2 and legions of others. The Romeo 8T is a large enclosed emitter red dot, similar to a loopholed LCO or the Steiner DRS-1X. It is not a holographic sight like a Vortex Huey or an EOTech. Most of the higher-end SIG Romeos, including the 4T and the 8T, have the ballistic circle reticle, which can be cycled through 4 modes. A standard 2 MOA center dot, 2 MOA dot with 65 MOA circle, a 2 MOA dot with a series of smaller 1 MOA ballistic drop dots, and the full reticle with all the dots in the circle. The small ballistic dots below the center dot aren't that useful on their own, but if you pair the 4T or 8T with a magnifier, they serve as a reference for your holds at extended ranges. At least that's the idea. I've tested the 4T and the 8T concurrently with both the Juliet 4 and Juliet 6 magnifiers, so we'll talk about those a little bit too. The SIG ballistic circle reticle is also available on the Romeo H series, which are much cheaper than the T models. The 4T and the 8T are made of 7075 aluminum instead of 6061 like the 4H and 8H models. The 8T also has a bolted-on steel shroud for extra ruggedness and weight. The 4T and 8T are available in FDE or black. The FDE color on the 4T is actually some kind of Cerakote rather than tannadizing, which is why it doesn't look like total hot fucking garbage. The T-series red dots include a bunch of tactical goodies like flip caps and kill flashes. The 4T also includes 3 mount options for low, absolute, or lower 1/3 co-witness. The red dot itself and the mounts are of a much higher quality than a Romeo 5 in most holosuns. The 8T even includes a fancy little wrench for installing and adjusting the optic. These red dots are SIG's cream of the crop and they're appropriately expensive. The 4T costs a bit over $500 and the 8T runs about $650. I'll just say straight up that the Romeo 4T is not worth that kind of money. It doesn't really have a performance advantage over cheaper red dots, so most of this video will be about the 8T. This is SIG's flagship model in terms of features and construction. It's also about the size and weight of a flagship. The Romeo 4T is powered by a side-mounted CR2032 battery, standard stuff, advertised as having 100,000 hours of battery life. It also has a solar panel on top, but it doesn't have a solar mode like the Holosun solar dots. If the battery is dead or removed, the 4T will run off the solar panel instead, if ambient light permits. The solar panel may also passively supplement the battery in normal operation, but it's pretty much impossible to tell. The 8T is powered by a transverse-mounted CR123 battery and has no solar gimmicks. Battery life on the 8T is also advertised as 100,000 hours, which is slightly higher than the sub-2,000 hour battery life of a loopholed LCO, Steiner DRS-1X, or any model of EOTech ever made. We can make a few more comparisons between the 8T and the LCO. The 8T doesn't have the refresh rate flicker of the LCO, and in my experience it also doesn't have the problem with the reflection of the emitter housing being visible in the front lens. The Romeo 8T sits at a lower third co-witness height instead of absolute co-witness like the LCO. I used the LCO with a Unity riser to make passive aiming with night vision more comfortable, but I didn't have to do that with the 8T. Your mileage may vary. Some people use Unity risers even with lower third optics like the 8T or the EOTech EXPS3. That seems kind of insane to me since this thing is already a really heavy and bulky red dot. The weight of the 8T as configured here is 13.3 ounces, heavier than an LCO or an EXPS3 or an Aimpoint Pro. And this is without any of the tactical flip caps or kill flash bullshit installed. The total system weight of the 8T paired with a Juliet 6 magnifier, as you see here, is just under 2 pounds of optics. The 8T is not just dense, but also physically huge. It takes up a ton of space on the rail. As you can see here, the Juliet 6 magnifier barely fits behind it and hangs way off the back of the receiver. Granted, this is a 6-power magnifier, and the Juliet series are some of the biggest, heaviest magnifiers on the market. The Juliet 4 is smaller and 2 ounces lighter, and it's overall a better fit, but that's still a lot of weight to drop on a rifle for so little magnification. The glass quality, construction, and performance of the full-size Juliet magnifiers is excellent, but they are really heavy. So the Romeo 8T is expensive and too big and way too heavy, but man is it excellent. Starting with night vision performance. The Romeo 4T performs no better than the Romeo 5, which is one of the worst optics for passive aiming, at least as far as red dots with actual night vision modes go. The Romeo 8T, on the other hand, performs extremely well. The EOTech EXPS3 is still the king of passive night vision performance, and the Romeo 8T is the only red dot I've used that almost dethrones it. I say almost because there are two facets to passive aiming to consider: light transmission and brightness settings. The EOTech EXPS3 and the Romeo 8T both have big optic windows and phenomenal glass clarity, so the light transmission on both is top-notch. The Aimpoint T2 and M5 are both very nearly as good as the EOTech, but the Romeo 8T might be just slightly better than the EOTech. It really is that good. So why isn't it better than an EOTech under night vision? Well, that's the other side of the coin: brightness settings. The Romeo 8T has 2 night vision settings, the EOTech EXPS3 has 10. EOTechs can always be adjusted to give proper reticle brightness no matter what the ambient lighting conditions are. Granted, the brightness settings on the 8T are well spaced. This isn't like the LCO, which has 5 night vision settings that are all too dim and 11 daylight settings that are all too bright. The 8T's lowest setting is dim enough, the second NV setting is better for mixed conditions, and the 2 lowest daylight settings are still dim enough to be usable on brighter evenings or in more urban settings. So technically the Romeo 8T only has 2 night vision settings compared to the 4 you'll find on most models of Aimpoint, but in practice you still basically got 4. The 8T is definitely among the top tier of all passive aiming optics. The EOTech, however, has the very useful night vision button, which lets you quickly switch from daytime mode into night vision mode. It also serves as a daylight mode lockout. You can never accidentally increase the brightness into daylight mode by pressing the up arrow too many times with the EOTech. The other thing the Romeo 8T does very well is magnifier performance. The ballistic circleplex reticle gives you more to work with at range compared to a basic 2 MOA red dot. Both the 4T and the 8T look great under a magnifier. Emitter placement is really key to this. Red dots with the emitter placed at an angle tend to look pretty bad under a magnifier. You might notice the reticle on an old Aimpoint or a Holosun or a SIG Romeo 5 turns into a diagonal slash when magnified. The Romeo 8T has the emitter at the 6 o'clock position, the 4T has it at the 3 o'clock position, and SIG's point source red dot emitter technology is some of the best. The reticles are very clean, and with a 3x or 4x magnifier, it's easy to distinguish the 1 MOA lower dots. The 4T does have a very noticeable blue tint to it, which does impact the magnifier experience. The 8T has a very slight amount of tint. You can notice it if you're looking for it, but I don't find it to be annoying. The utility of these ballistic reticles will depend on how well you can get your chosen load to match up to the BDC dots. I found that the 4T and 8T reticle matched up very well to a 36-yard 0 with M855 green tip on an 11.5-inch suppressed AR. You're going to need to chronograph your load, crunch the numbers in a ballistic calculator, and then adjust your 0 as necessary depending on what you put one of these things on. Being able to utilize that full reticle with only a 3 or 4x magnifier is not so easy. That's just not a lot of magnification for the ranges we're talking about. You could step up to a 6-power magnifier like the Juliet 6 or the Vortex Micro 6, but those might just be a bad idea altogether. I'll have to talk in detail about magnified red dots some other time. Even though the 8T does look great under a magnifier, the EOTech still maintains its lead. It just looks a little better. The glass is completely clear, no tint at all, and holographic reticles stay more precise when magnified than reflector red dots. If you want a reticle with extra ballistic dots, EOTech makes the EXPS 3-4 and 3-2 that have the same concept of cascading smaller dots below the center dot. So the EXPS 3s are still better under magnifiers and better under nods, but they have all the usual EOTech drawbacks which the Romeo 8T doesn't have. The selectable reticle means the Romeo 8T can function like an EXPS 3-4, a 3-0, or any regular red dot on demand. You don't need to always use the BDC if you don't want it, but the option is there. The huge battery life and MOTAC feature means the 8T is always on and always ready to go. Just in terms of raw capability, the SIG Romeo 8T is probably the best red dot on the market. A borderline indestructible cinder block of an optic with excellent night vision and magnifier performance and a way more modern feature set than any of the currently available EOTech models. I know there are some guys out there who legitimately do not care about weight at all. I think you're probably a short hike away from changing your mind about that, but in the meantime, the 8T might be everything you're looking for in an optic. I think it pairs very well with the SIG Juliet 4 magnifier, but keep in mind, seeing mixed brands of red dot and magnifier on the same gun gives me a brain aneurysm. The Romeo 4T has a much narrower appeal. The included mounts, the fancy tactical kill flash, the 7075 aluminum body, the reticle options, decent magnifier performance, and the fact that it's made in Oregon might be enough for somebody who doesn't really care about passive aiming with night vision. Also, the 4T is the optic that Christian Craighead, aka the Nairobi Ninja, had on his rifle when he shot 2 Al-Shabaab militants in 2019, so that's pretty fucking based. I don't think either of these would be my first choice for a red dot though. The 4T is the form factor that I like, but it desperately needs a refresh. It's actually one of the oldest red dots in SIG's lineup. If it had less tint, better night vision performance, and even half as much battery life, I would be totally fine with it. The Romeo 8T has no performance shortcomings that need to be addressed. It's just too big and too heavy for something that only barely outperforms something like an Aimpoint T2 for very slightly less money. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. As always, let me know if you have any questions in the comments of this video. If you like this channel, subscribe, obviously. I mean, you know how YouTube works. And if you'd like to support me directly, there is a link to a Subscribe Star page in the video description. See you next time.